Steve Jobs, Part 7, Final Years, Leadership Philosophy and Legacy. By the late 2000s, Steve Jobs had become something rare in modern culture, a figure who existed at the intersection of technology, art, business, and myth. He was the man who had rebuilt Apple from the brink of collapse, the architect of the iPod, iPhone, and iPad, and the visionary who transformed Pixar into the world's most beloved animation studio. But behind the public triumphs, Jobs was fighting a more private and devastating battle, one that would shape the tone, urgency, and emotional gravity of his final years. Sign: the first signs of illness. In 2003, during routine testing, doctors discovered a tumor in his pancreas. At first, Jobs resisted surgery, turning instead to alternative diets and treatments influenced by his long-standing commitment to Zen and natural living. The delay would haunt him and those closest to him. Eventually, he underwent surgery, but the cancer returned. And although Jobs fought quietly, determined to protect his privacy, the disease became an undeniable presence in his life. Colleagues noticed him growing thinner. His energy fluctuated, his face seemed more fragile, but his intensity, his vision, and his insistence on excellence never wavered. If anything, the illness sharpened his focus. Jobs seemed determined to build as much of the future as he could while time still allowed. He pushed Apple's teams harder. He worked through exhaustion. He approved designs from hospital beds. He lived with urgency. To some, it felt like he was sprinting against time. Leadership refined, simplicity, focus, and craftsmanship. Throughout these years, Jobs distilled his leadership philosophy into a few core principles that would outlive him and form the bedrock of Apple's culture. 1. Focus. Jobs believed that innovation was not about saying yes to everything, but saying no to almost everything. Deciding what not to do, he said, is as important as deciding what to do. 2. Simplicity. He saw simplicity not as the absence of complexity, but as the product of deep understanding. A product was done, not when there was nothing left to add, but when there was nothing left to remove. 3. End-to-end integration. Hardware and software should be one seamless expression. Apple's magic came from controlling the entire user experience. 4. Taste. Jobs believed technology alone wasn't enough. It needed to be infused with artistry, humanity, and beauty. Apple products were not just tools, they were expressions of culture. 5. Deep collaboration. At Apple, designers, engineers, marketers, and executives worked side by side. Silos were torn down. Creativity was collective. 6. A culture of excellence. Jobs demanded brilliance. Mediocrity was not tolerated. And while his intensity could be brutal, it also pushed people to create the best work of their lives. These principles were not theories. They were lived practices. They shaped every decision, every product, every conversation inside Apple. But Jobs also understood that even the strongest culture needed continuity, and so he made one of the hardest decisions of his life: succession. Choosing Tim Cook. Steve Jobs knew he would not be able to lead Apple forever. He needed someone who shared his commitment to focus, discipline, and operational excellence. That person was Tim Cook, an operations genius who had quietly reshaped Apple's supply chain into the most efficient in the world. Cook was calm, where Jobs was fiery, methodical, where Jobs was instinctive, a steady hand to complement Jobs' creative force. Jobs believed Cook could preserve Apple's values while ensuring stability, and in 2011, after years of health struggles, Steve stepped down as CEO. He didn't choose a designer. He didn't choose an engineer. He chose a leader who understood Apple from the inside out. Jobs remained involved as chairman, but the transition was clear. He had prepared the company for a future without him. Final reflections: family, mortality, and meaning. In the last months of his life, Jobs spent increasing time with family, especially his wife Lorene and their children. Though his work had demanded impossible amounts of time and attention, his final days were marked by a quieter kind of presence. He spoke more openly about legacy, about the fragility of life, and about the astonishing journey that had carried him from a California garage to the center of global innovation. In conversations with Walter Isaacson, who was writing his authorized biography, Jobs reflected on everything: his triumphs, his mistakes, his faith, his regrets, his philosophy. Life, he said, is fragile, but it is also beautiful, creative, and full of possibility. Jobs believed that each generation had the opportunity to push humanity forward, to put a dent in the universe. That dent, to him, was not just technological. It was artistic, emotional, and spiritual. He had spent his life at the intersection of technology and the humanities because he believed they were not opposing forces, but complementary ones. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world, Jobs said, are the ones who do. The final day. On October 5, 2011, Steve Jobs passed away at the age of 56. Outside Apple stores around the world, people created spontaneous memorials, flowers, messages, handwritten notes. Apples with bites taken out. Millions felt as if they had lost a guiding figure, a creative force who had shaped the texture of their daily lives. Inside Apple's headquarters, employees wept. Many had been pushed to their limits by Jobs. Many had been inspired by him. All had been transformed. Tim Cook announced to the world, Apple has lost a visionary and creative genius, and the world has lost an amazing human being. But his legacy was only just beginning. Legacy. The imprint on the world. Steve Jobs' impact can be felt in nearly every corner of modern life. Artificial intelligence. Macintosh defined user-friendly computers. Music. iPod and iTunes reshaped an entire industry. Telecommunications. iPhone ushered in the smartphone age. Animation. Pixar reimagined storytelling and set artistic standards. Digital lifestyle. Apple's ecosystem became the heartbeat of modern technology. Design thinking. Jobs normalized the idea that technology must also be beautiful. His influence extends beyond products. It lives in the culture of Silicon Valley, the philosophy of integrated experiences, the importance of craftsmanship, the belief in simplicity, the courage to say no, the audacity to follow intuition. He didn't just build a company, he built a template, a way of thinking, a way of creating, a way of seeing the world. Ultimately, Steve Jobs showed that technology could be poetic, that machines could feel human, that creativity and engineering could coexist, and that one person, with enough passion, vision, and perseverance, could change the world. And in doing so, he left behind not just products, but a legacy of possibility, a legacy that continues to shape the world he left behind, a legacy that whispers in its simplest form, think different.